everybody kicked it off this morning with a company called FlackX. They are in new to Grand Rapids within the last couple of years, have another location in Austin, Texas. We're so grateful to have them here doing amazing things in AI. Mark Losey is the CTO with FlackX, and he's going to take it from here.
All right, I got this through here. Can you guys hear me? I talk loud anyways, but we'll see how it works out. So thanks for having us here. Like, it matters now. They said FlackX is new to Grand Rapids, but I'm not. I grew up here. I was born in Zealand, and I grew up just on the other side of the river there. It's the first time back in 35 years, like being here and working for a company here. So thanks for having me. And let's just start out. We're going to talk about delivering connectedness and the epidemic of loneliness, which is kind of the core mission of FlackX. So we'll start with connection. We'll go through kind of theories of communication, and then how we're going to solve that, or how we're going to attempt to solve that with technology. So starting with connection. We've been in a hyper-connected world that is incredibly fragmented. For the last 40 years, we've been slowly becoming lonelier and lonelier. The internet connected us across the entire globe and created these abilities for people to connect with people in China or Thailand or Russia that had shared interest. And so it made the world smaller in a way, but it left us sitting behind computers in order to achieve that connection. And one of the key things to happiness is the hormone oxytocin, and that is created with in-person engagements. You have to be just in the presence of other humans to develop that hormone and produce that hormone. So our epidemic of loneliness in 2023, the Surgeon General released a study on exactly how dramatic this issue is. 1 in 2 adults are reported experiencing loneliness, and it's something like 35% of adults have reported extreme loneliness. And we got a fact from a gentleman we talked to yesterday who's got a startup in town that's working on a similar issue that said 12% of adults haven't talked to a human in the last 8 days, like in person. So that seemed pretty dramatic, but he was a very smart guy with good stats. So it's associated with all these damages, being lonely, cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, and according to the Surgeon General, that these are even greater risks than obesity or physical inactivity, which we've known for years is kind of our Achilles heel. So our mission is to solve that problem. So since I'm back in Grand Rapids, the home of the Dutch, I thought that I would bring a word from my youth that my family used to say, and I will not pronounce it correctly, gezellig. And it's really about, it's not really represented in other languages quite the way. This word is kind of unique to Dutch. And it's about coziness, fun, and general warmth, and just that fuzzy feeling that you get around being around loved ones. So I thought that was the perfect word to bring into this conversation as we head out to focus on the epidemic of loneliness. So communication. This is a concept that I received from my girlfriend, who's been in sales her entire life, and kind of a core foundation of how she operates is that we all seek to understand and to be understood. And that's the foundation of a good communication and a good relationship. That the two people or multiple people involved in that exchange are both understanding that's the fundamental component of the conversation. And so we use that as the foundation for how we're attacking the way we build cognitive structures in AI, and how we're looking to create the core primitives that allow us to have the right shaped brick to build things on top of it that are guaranteed to deliver forward movement or a positive direction. So it starts with looking at history, because no good idea ever was developed on its own. So there's these core kind of theoretical foundations. Communication theory of identity. It's really about how do our identity is created by the way we express ourselves, and we express our identity by the way we communicate. So it's very personal, it's very enacted in this moment, clearly relational, and then communal in how we all are communicating together. Social penetration theory, which is this idea that we move through a relationship from relatively superficial communication to slowly gaining trust and sharing more over time. and that is really how we develop meaningful relationships. So these are all key pieces that we're putting into our underlying foundation to achieve these outcomes. And then a systems theory, which is that interconnectedness of communication components is really greater than the sum of its parts. And it boils down to this idea that both the system that you're in controls some of the communication that you are, and you have an effect on that overall system. But that it's seeking stasis. And that stasis could be inertia in a bad direction, or it could be calming the outliers to create a more stable communication system. But ultimately, it's really about that the system and the environment affects our communication as much as we are affecting the system and environment. And then this is a theory, but this is also more about the operation. So a transactional model is this idea that we're always constantly sending and receiving, seeking to be understood and seeking to understand. And that cycle of real-time feedback, personal engagement, and environmental factors is key to how we operate communication. And so we use this more in the foundation of how are we going to engage this communication model based on those previous theories that are about what are the methods that we gain increased communication, increased understanding, and deeper relationships. So the essence of communication is not the message, but in the connections that we create through that communication. There's so much more nuance than the words themselves. They're the eye contact and the body language and the way that we are assuring someone when we feel safe, or acting standoffish when we don't feel safe, and learning how to build those connections through good communication paradigms and protocols. So the summary of this talk says graph theory, and graph theory is a big word that, well, it's not that big a word, but it's really about math, and most people are like, oh, math, I got to get out of here. But it's not that complicated. So graphs are really about these nodes that represent concrete items, physical things, entities, humans, your pet, and edges being the connections or the relationships between those nodes. And then loops as a additional form in graph theory is this idea that you can be repeating these relationships over and over in order to achieve certain outcomes. They may be continuously improving or degrading, but either way, these loops in the graph that allow us to improve. So it's really about modeling pairwise relations, just means modeling the relations between these two items, and then that scales out to modeling against the other two items. Or other two items. It's always about a node and an edge, and that edge being that relationship. So graphs to know and graphs that you probably have heard of. It goes long before the web graph. They were studying graph theory, but for our modern times, a web graph is that study of all the interlinking pages on the internet that became very popular by Google as PageRank, which was the number of items linking back to your page would indicate your popularity and be some increased ability to get ranked in their search engine. Then Facebook came along and made the social graph extremely popular. How are people connected? And they use that as their method of mining information and delivering advertising and messaging, and whose messages are you seeing was all based on that social graph. Then TikTok came along and ate their lunch with the interest graph, which was more engaging than just who I already know. It was about who's has the same shared interests as me, who's into acoustic guitars, who's into pottery, who's into the knitting circle. And the interest graph became enormously powerful. And a lot of what FlockX is doing is based off shared interests. It's just not about keeping you stuck to a screen. It's about getting you out to in-person events of other humans who have the same shared interests as you. Because the example I use all the time, and anyone from Michigan who's been around the automotive knows this, if you can meet two people and it doesn't matter how different they are culturally, if they're both into small block Mustang engines, they can communicate in a way that is just fascinating. They don't even have to speak the same language. But to have that shared interest in that hobby that you're so into, it just makes all the differences disappear. And we need so much more of that in this world because, like, if you watch the news, you'll see my people a little hung up on some differences. And then where we're heading and what we're building now is this idea of a communication graph. And that's the idea of these fundamental components of how we're communicating with each other. So that seeking to understand and seeking to be understood. We're getting, I think we got a little, oh, sorry guys, I'll have to get back to the beginning here. Always a tech hiccup when it's the tech guy giving the presentation. That's like the essence of. And I haven't used this particular present. Yep. There we go. Thank you. I got my tech support over here. All right. Graphs we know. So the new paradigm, how are we creating cognition in the world of AI that's going to help us achieve these goals of battling the epidemic of loneliness, of getting people to in-person events to achieve that human connection with shared interests. One of the things is our kind of theory of communication that's built on these other theories is that language is really helpful, but language isn't communication. That communication is much deeper. There's great examples of non-language based communication. When the birds sing in the morning before the sun comes up, it actually causes the flowers to open. It's not the sun that's causing the flowers to open. It's the birds anticipating, knowing from shifts in, barometric pressure or whatever, the sun's about to come up, and they signal. And that is a purest form of collaborative communication to achieve shared outcomes. But they're not using language to describe in a bunch of words, complex ideas. They're literally just communicating intent and sentiment, and the system, the living system around them, is responding to that in a collaborative way. And that's kind of a core mission we need to get to, is understand that as smart as we feel, we are just a component in a larger living system. And that larger living system is what's critical to the survival of every single species and to any of us actually getting along. Because realize you're a part. However smart you feel, however much money you make in a business, it doesn't change that you are just a participant in this larger living system that involves all of us and the birds and the bees and the puppies. Everyone loves puppies. So this idea of contextual understanding and how we build a communication structure that's based off sentiment and intent. And so under the hood, we're doing some things with language. Right now it's pretty text-based, but going into kind of voice recognition, things like that. Some wearables that we're researching is how are you establishing and detecting these communication patterns that are beneath language. We can all use the same word and have dramatically different meanings for it. But if we're detecting our emotional state and our intent, then we can be, I think, much more clear on what the balance of communication is or what we're trying to achieve. And we can eliminate some of the things that we become offended by because a word from someone's culture doesn't mean the same as a word from someone else's culture. And they assign all this meaning to that word, but they're really just trying to achieve some understanding in a goal they're trying to accomplish, or sharing knowledge about a shared interest or a hobby. Like how do you torque the head bolts on a small block Mustang? I'm not a car guy. It's just lived around a lot of car guys in Metro Detroit. And so it's just when you see their eyes light up, that's the example that works. It's always just building computers for me. But so in the background here, you'll see this is an actual graph that we're using to power the FlockX app for voting on Art Prize, for finding out activities where other people with shared interests are. And we use this tool called LangGraph that allows us to model out the graph, what we call our cognitive structure of our application. And so right now we've got some pretty high level pieces. They're like, hey, I'm a primary assistant and I help you find the other assistants that are going to help you. So we're living at a high level now. As we move forward, that's when we'll be trying to create that right shaped brick that is the core of intent and sentiment, that then we can stack up to create these other components that will naturally be aligned to this idea of community perpetuity, or of this idea of that we're all in a living system and that all of this communication should be goal-based towards achieving being a good participant, not necessarily being the most productive or being the smartest, but the system is supported by the regular participants. There's the outliers that we love because outliers bring new ideas. The entire celebration of Art Prize is a celebration of the outliers. Throughout all history, you got your Da Vinci's, you got your Einsteins. They're outliers in certain areas, and it's essentially they're the chaos in the system of homogenation, right? We're all trying to kind of fit in a little bit. I try to fit in a little less, but uh, as we're trying to fit in, we become accustomed to a train of thought, and that train of thought or that method of operation can become stagnant to changing times. The outliers tend to bring the new ideas, introduce them. It's just the ideas that people are like, wow, that's interesting and new. And it can engage a group of humans who can now pursue these new ideas. And that is the true value of artistry and outliers, is they become the chaos in what has been the most successful algorithm of all time, which is evolution. And evolution's magic trick is diversity. More diverse populations are stronger populations. That's true in nature. It's true in human interactions, because when that population is diverse, those outliers can bring ideas into the larger group that can become adopted and allows for forward movement of the entire species or the entire living system. So what we see as the future of communication. First of all, multi-entity communication. We think that if we can solve the idea of intent and sentiment detection as a fundamental principle of communication, that language is now something that can be translated in the context of that intent and sentiment, so we can kind of remove language as a barrier from understanding each other. That can apply itself not just to us as humans, but our communication with our pets, our communication with the plants in our garden. This idea of being able to understand the signals that we give off. For humans, it's sentiment and intent. For a plant, we have recent studies that demonstrate how they are communicating amongst each other and signaling with chemical signals. Okay, this flower just got cut down. I'm going to send this chemical signal, and you can see a chemical difference in the plants around as they are hearing this chemical signal. And that's just like for us, sentiment and intent, those chemical signals. So if we can really model communication appropriately with the right shaped brick to build from, then we can communicate across species in a way that helps us understand our participation in a living system. So cross-cultural communication, clearly language is a barrier on the planet when we are traveling. Being able to figure out how that fundamental lower level piece of communication works will allow us to have like fewer misunderstandings, greater conflict resolution, and just generally a better shared framework for decision making, because we're all understanding our participation in a larger system. And then global collaboration. Clearly, these things add up to how can we participate globally in improving everything from education to business to social engagement. And so the communication graph, we feel like it offers a framework that transcends language barriers. It allows entities and entities being these participants in the system to focus on understanding agreement as opposed to what our differences are or what the personal needs are, because we fear we're not going to receive from the system what we give into the system. And that through structured, scalable communication, we can turn this into a really powerful method of connecting people together and all the other creatures that we share it with. So I went a little quick on that one, but I'm open to questions and to talk more about how we actually are building our AI cognition systems using graph technology. If anybody's got any questions.
Relatively interesting question. These particular models are going to be relatively large and take a lot of resources. As we keep heating up on this planet, we're going to have a conflict between me wanting to cool down my house and these data centers wanting to cool down those data centers. Does anybody really put actual thought behind this?
Yeah, so there is an enormous amount of people focused on that particular problem. And I would say the answer is going to come from the open source world, as we've seen lots of great technology innovations come from. So what we're focused on, like even in our graph, we're not focused on using a particular language model. each of the smaller components are, one of them is just what's called a BERT model. That's just doing extraction of entities, so names and places and stuff like that. It's a very tiny little model. It does what it does really well, and it is not like take up a whole data center kind of model. So it's really about the combination of using the different tech, and just like all other technologies that humans have ever been involved with, we get better as we go along. So whenever we try to like draw a straight line from here to where we think we'll be, we always end up innovating and coming up with some kind of ability to make it faster, cheaper, and more effective and efficient.
I do not speak loud, so the microphone.
There you go.
So help me understand what you transactional friction, preventing individuals and that kind of thing.
I would say it's not about, well, sure. I would say the transaction of communication, definitely reducing the friction, but really more about the goal of understanding, right? Truly having understanding between us as opposed to talking at each other, to understand each other's intent and to be able to read the sentiment that we're feeling through that communication. So we can then have a feedback loop that says, okay, we're starting to understand, but maybe we're feeling frustrated. So we can use that feedback loop to alter our path of communication. So yeah, transactional friction is a pretty good word for it. I'm going to add that to my slides. So that's a fantastic question. It really is about kind of our core technology at FlockX is the idea we've got this mapping technology on one side of the app, which helps you find the art prize entries, just so you know, which it could be described, or our vision for it could be described as, most people are familiar with Johnny Depp in the Pirates of the Caribbean. He has a compass and it does not point north. It points to the thing he wants most. And so that's what we're trying to achieve with our mapping technology is mining these signals of shared interest and then be able to guide you to the places where people are into the same hobbies as you, these kind of areas of aggregation. Then the other side of the app is our AI sidekick, and the AI sidekick's intended future and what we see as the world is this idea of having a personal agent that your well-being is their like highest level goal, and they can go out and use these communication tools to communicate with other agents or other humans, but that we get a universal communication layer that lets it communicate with your pet if necessary. Like it's a wild dream, but I think it would be really cool to have a conversation with my dog Oslo, who is also from Norway. So he's from the Scandinavian place, just like all the rest of us. Thank you. Yeah, we got a question in the back there.
All right. Kind of an off-the-wall question, but I'm interested in your thoughts on kind of how AI and communication kind of intersect. Recently, I read a LinkedIn article that talked about ChatGPT now prompting out proactively. It was a high school student that just finished their first week of high school and it literally jumped on at the end of the week and said, hey, how was your first week of high school? How did it go? Just wondering your thoughts about that replacing physical people-to-people communication versus AI to people.
So that's a perfect example for what we're doing at FlockX as well, is working on some proactive tools on the AI side, but it's really about encouraging the health and well-being of the individual. So being a companion in that goal. So not like we've met a lot of people who are doing these AI boyfriends, AI girlfriends, and we've been working with Ron Ivey, who works at, I believe it's Harvard, on studying loneliness and consulting with, heads of state of Europe and presidents in America. And he's like super, super concerned about these feedback loops that are just always telling me that what I said was right. And that's these AI girlfriends and boyfriends. That's kind of the tech that they're using to draw people in. But the reality is I need someone to tell me when I'm wrong. And I know someone who's super happy to do it. And then really good at it and does it in a nice way. So that's a positive benefit that I get. But one of the pieces that we're trying to use, the proactive piece of messaging, is to look at that social penetration theory, right? In order to gain trust, we need to share slowly until we feel more trust, and then we share more. And our goal with our sidekick is to start to learn more about you, so that we can we dynamically extract what we call fact tables. And so there's facts that it knows about you, and those get submitted into the context prompts, so that you get a much more realistic and meaningful interaction with this companion that has a goal of your well-being. So yeah, like, I wouldn't say I'm concerned. I would say that it's a natural progress where, I mean, right now we live in a world where social media is a constant negative feedback loop because we're not seeing each other in person. So now I'm anonymous and I can be angry and I can just spray it out there, and then everyone else will be angry, and then the advertiser's like, well, they're paying attention to stuff, so let's say more angry stuff. Whereas I think we have some control in this new paradigm as long as we act quickly and make sure that we're building the right size bricks that everything else is built on top of, that doesn't leave this entire AI world driven by advertising the way our search world was and our social media world.
Can you talk about any of the biases you've seen in any of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we had an interesting one. So we generate these these thumbnails, right? So it's image generation with AI, and we generate these thumbnails to represent kind of the crossover, the merging of a business and a shared interest. So as we advertise points of interest, it could be the library, it could be a park. In order to make it visually attractive in the application, we want to apply an image to that matches the interest that person is belonging in. So they're belonging in certain communities, and so when they see the point of interest on our system, that they see an image that they can connect with because it's representing at that business what part of my shared interest is there. So if it's, at some bar down the street, like there used to be Jack's Web, it would be darts. Other facilities will be something different. But as we're going through and generating those images, we're putting in all these complex prompts, and OpenAI is rewriting the prompts in real time. And then when they send you the response, you're seeing these imageries that doesn't have anything to do with anything that we're trying to achieve, but it's inserted all of this attempt to correct bias, which is a little shocking, and it's just over-indexing in one direction, right? I'm the guy that believes diversity is the ultimate algorithm, but I just want an image that is like darts and Buffalo Wild Wings. And they send me an image that's filled with every single cultural person there is, and I said, don't put any people in it. So they're over-indexing, and they're making mistakes in that over-indexing. I specifically don't want any people in my images because I want you to see the interest. The whole point is that you see what you're interested in, and then you show up there, and who's ever there is, you're going to connect with them because you're into the same thing. And so it's a strange over-index on trying to battle bias in the models instead of doing the hard work of cleaning the data they trained it on, which is what they should have been doing, is looking to really analyze and put the hard work into what I'm going to train my model on, and not now after the fact, let me see if I can slap some Band-Aids on this thing, because it never goes right. You got to do the hard work up front.
Hi, you mentioned a couple times the metaphor of finding the right shaped brick. So I have two questions. One is, what would be indicators that that brick is right or wrong to you, like criteria you might look for to know if it's a good fit? And then two would be, what kind of things are you varying as you search for the right shaped brick? Like, what knobs do you have to work with here?
So there's an incredible tool set out there right now that's kind of just emerging and becoming better and better. So when I say the right shaped brick, I'm really talking about a fundamental primitive of any given system. So like in computers, it's ones and zeros, right? But for a communication protocol or for an underlying AI alignment with humans, we need a brick that says it's not going to figure out where the problem. that it understands we're all participating in a system. And so we need to delve a little bit into some of the indigenous philosophies. We need to look back at our history. The great example I always use is the Blackfoot Indians. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if anyone's familiar with that, it wasn't really his. He spent 12 weeks with the Blackfoot Indians, and then he took what they looked at as being a part of a living system, and he turned it into a very personal kind of, this only applies to one human in their goal of self-actualization. And it just flipped the idea on its head. The Blackfoot Indians' philosophy was, at your birth, at every living thing's like instantiation in this world, they have the same value as a participant in the system. And that the goal on the top of that pyramid, which is really a teepee, was community perpetuity. That you were born self-actualized, and through society we've been taking it away, but that if you're paying attention to everyone's value, that your goal can now become, how do we just have a community perpetuity? How do we continue the system and our part in it? And so we've got to have our brick, have that be the goal, so that when AI surpasses us in intelligence or whatever the grim future people want to put on TV, that it really has a positive goal for the entire living system. And I think it will see us as a really huge benefit because we've achieved language and art and understanding. So that's the right shaped brick, something that when we stack it up too high, it doesn't fall over and kill us. Yeah.
Sounds like you're kind of building this collection of information that you're storing in a graph and kind of understanding interests and affinities that a person may have or a node in the graph. We do a lot of work in healthcare, so I'm just curious, how do you determine, or is there things that you have to kind of discard or trim off the graph where maybe it's private information or information that someone might not want to be shared? Hey, I'm searching for a hip replacement or something like that. Now it becomes medical information, or there's sensitive information like mental health concerns or things like that. So, hey, all of a sudden I've determined this person is very heavily into, this mental health situation or something like that. So, is it appropriate or not appropriate for you to be storing it? Or do you have like lines that you have to worry about that?
Yeah, so we're ultimately anonymize everything in the highest degree we can. We came from HIPAA backgrounds and e-commerce and GRDP. And so looking at like foundationally, the way we're building the system is everyone is a UUID, which is a really just big, long thing of numbers and letters. And so ultimately the connections can be one automatically scrubbed, but also be anonymized so that we're looking at, and particularly in healthcare, the benefit of information sharing is so valuable when it's not taken advantage of, right? Because if we can say, map out our physical traits and we have a tendency towards these bad outcomes, that if we can share that anonymously and it can be studied in a meaningful way, we can detect what's working for who. And so it's definitely the problem we have to solve. For us, we're keeping it pretty simple. We're operating the same way we operate in the e-commerce world, is just to kind of anonymize the data, and then at read points, have real-time personal information stripping, so that you can get the anonymous part of it. But I think it's just a thing that's a part of the brick. You have to build that in at the beginning. You can't later on decide that I'm going to now pay attention to personal information. It's got to be a part of the very beginning of the foundation, because the band-aids don't work and it will leak out everywhere if it's not a part of the core design or architecture.
I apologize, first of all. I'm a little bit slow catching up to what you were sharing, and I did not do my research about FluxX before I came. So my question is, could you share a story of how one of your users would interact with the system and what kind of value they would be getting out of it? Especially you mentioned how a lot of social media traps people behind a computer screen, and I wonder how FluxX is solving that problem by bringing them outside.
Yeah.
Maybe a story of that sort.
Absolutely. So kind of the key data in the app is activities that are going on in the real world. So that's kind of the foundational principle. So we're mining data all over the web. And then we're also introducing the ability for people to add things they see, so that they're additional signals that then have more information around them because that individual submitting information has a community profile. They are into the knitting circle, or they're into acoustic jams or pickup basketball games. And so those are then addendums or metadata on top of what they're submitting. So now we know we can find associations of shared interest. But the whole mission of the app is you open it up, you start to have a conversation, and the sidekick itself is going to encourage you to get to activities. Through conversation, it's learning a little bit more about you, what your interests are. You don't like seafood, or you have a dog, and then encouraging you to, hey, it would be great to have a walk on Saturday at this park down the street. Did you know they're going to have live music in the afternoon? And so those pieces are both identifying the activities that would be most aligned with the individual, but also then encouraging and providing descriptions about why and when they should be getting out. We're following this paradigm that we learned from Ron Ivey and a few of his other researchers that talk about the way to really solve loneliness in kind of this grand sense is this step-by-step process. The first step is, if you're been living in your basement playing video games and introverted, I work on the computer, so I spend a lot of time isolated on the computer, that the first thing is to get out into a group of humans that are into some shared interest. You don't have to talk to anybody. You just have to get comfortable with being in the presence of those other people. Then the next time you go out, create one meaningful conversation. And that then creates this sense of confidence and ability to navigate that social engagement. But then the real solution is that the follow-up to that is that you need to maintain those relationships. So you're getting out, getting comfortable, creating at least an engagement, and then trying to maintain those relationships over time, whether that's participating in that community and becoming a member of that community is helping it, whether you're helping to organize one of the get-togethers, or that becomes your path towards participation in the living system. Anyone else? I got more answers. Hey.
Sorry, I was a little late, but I'm wondering if you've addressed like the issue of codependency on an app like this. For
Yes.
a profit program like this.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that with a question someone else asked about these AI girlfriends and boyfriends that are using a positive reinforcing feedback loop to basically tell you everything you say is right. And that is horrible. Like, it's just really bad for the way we can spin out in our minds once we're being told we're right about things that are pretty horrifying.
Yeah, I'm thinking like as a mom, like
Yep.
I have a child, I don't want to tell her how to go outside and do something. I want her to get that on her own,
Yep.
get that, and not have to rely on me or someone else to tell her how to seek out connection and avoid loneliness, or how to have positive loneliness. So I wonder if that's something you're building into this.
Yeah, so it's kind of the core idea is to have the goal of your well-being. So if you don't know how to do those things, then the sidekick needs to help you get out and learn those things. If you do know how to do those things, then your sidekick will help you organize events so other people can join and become part of the community. So in any given community, like guitars, I always use the knitting circle thing because my daughter knits, there's different archetypes involved in that community. There's the organizer, there's the one who just is the craftsman and knows every detail of the history of the craft, and then there's the socializers, right? And so we need all of that diversity of personalities and contributions. And the sidekick, our mission for the sidekick is to help each one of those archetypes, and the fact that all of us are a little bit of every one of those archetypes, depending on which seat we're sitting in at which given table. In certain groups, I'm the leader of knowledge in a craft. And the other group, I'm the follower who is like, hey, like I'm loving this, but I don't know as much as you guys do, and I'm here to participate and join, and I'll carry the tables in. So I think there's a combination, and it's kind of a complex answer, but we're extremely focused on it in a very foundational way. Yeah.
This is kind of coming, I'm probably good. This is coming on the heels of Meta rolling out their teen accounts, right? So Instagram, if anyone hasn't seen, obviously putting a lot of safeguards in place as far as when teen accounts can access things, privacy, all of those things. What are your plans, if any, to have those same type of safeguards?
Yeah, so that's kind of a number one focus of ours because it's the right shaped brick. And so, just like protecting personal information, it's and my children who are 21 have volunteered to be as obnoxious as possible with our sidekick to see what they could get it to say. And we work with people all over the country who are like, hey, let me break this thing. Let me get it to say something obnoxious or something completely inappropriate. And so we put that back into our feedback loop that we have this kind of giant engine of messages that go through and relearn and identify appropriate responses, and those are tagged, and those then become the learning data for the next round of the system. And so we're in constant acknowledgement and understanding and focus on those key principles. The one that's not going to be a positive feedback loop that's destructive, that it's going to focus on connectedness between people, not hate and speech that's separating us. And we've been highly effective so far at making that happen. There will be hiccups as there are in all these systems, but we're clearly focused on that as a foundational principle of age-appropriate interactions.
You mentioned e-commerce. I was wondering how you see it, if you see e-commerce being less influenced by advertising going forward with this new communication model and possibly moving away from influence and the social models.
Yeah, so so our parent company is Fetch AI, and they are designing the future of commerce that is not this. It's so different from our current commerce. Our current commerce is, ooh, pretty picture. This is really interesting to you. I'm either going to trigger your anger or your happiness or your addiction in order to achieve the goal of just making a couple extra bucks. So what our parent company is building is called the Agentverse. We see a future where every one of us has a personal AI agent that looks out for our well-being, and that they are operating across an agentic marketplace where we can build into the protocols that they're using to communicate with each other fundamental win-win outcomes that is like as the core block cannot be one taking advantage of the other. That becomes a mutual benefit. And that's why everything starts with this idea of seeking to understand or be understood. That we see that as that primitive. So we're building that into this agent verse where you will register your agents, both if you're a gig worker who does, house calls for handyman services, or you're selling MacBooks. That the agent is what your personal agent will interact with and achieve those outcomes. So they'll be doing fewer emotionally triggering purchases and more logical purchases that support your lifestyle and what you're trying to achieve with your shared interests, your personal agenda in life. That's going to be more focused on those data-driven decisions that can actually and meaningfully help you accomplish your goals. Well, actually, I think the retailers who have in-person facilities, actual retail facilities, I think it's going to be extremely beneficial because the minutia shopping will be done by our agents, and our entertainment shopping or our fashion shopping or our shopping is as much a shared interest as playing guitar. And so there is a thing of going around with your friends and shopping for clothes and trying stuff on and asking them about it, like that'll increase that as a social endeavor. But when it comes to the online commerce, it's going to be way less about how do I cheat the system to make sure I'm first on this list and I'm first on that list, and becomes, I think this is an important component of the system. Probably the one really fantastic application for blockchain technology is a reputation system. The only thing the most valuable thing I think about blockchain technology is immutable store, right? You can't change the past. And so these agents will have their reputation stored on a blockchain so that we know their history of delivering on a given capability. And so they will advertise their capabilities, their uptime, these kind of things, and how they receive arguments. I need to know this, this, and this in order to engage in this sale for you. That idea of having reputation tracks that cannot be changed is just a paradigm shift of significance in being able to conduct honest sales that are based on a real history. And that each agent that does business with another agent can log a opinion about how close they were to accomplishing the goal they promised, et cetera. All those things involved in a solid reputation system. That's not just about writing too many paragraphs about one particular word so you can't get the answer until you spend a half an hour just so they could get first place on Google. Yeah, one more question.
Lucky me. Good morning. I love that talk. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
To go deeper on this question. So you mentioned earlier that the world's becoming a smaller place, and then implied that the loneliness was caused because you have to sit behind a computer to get that benefit. But it sounds like your sidekick would still feed into this.
Its goal is always to get you out.
So it's just a step in it then, just to get people.
Yes, its goal is to help you get out. Well, its goal is your well-being in its entirety, but that getting out into in-person events it really boils down to hormone oxytocin, which we cannot produce unless we're in the presence of other humans. And so that becomes the goal in this current time frame. As we head into the future, we intend on solving this epidemic of loneliness. So there are going to be other goals of your well-being. But for now, that is the number one agenda to solve that problem, is to get you in the presence of other humans and get you participating in these communities that you're interested in, finding your place in those communities so you can be a participant in that living system.
Love it. Great goal.
Thank you.
Big hand for Mark.
Thanks.
Mark, how can people follow you?
I don't do much social media. So LinkedIn's the best thing you got. Because I'm not participating in that loop there. But yeah, on LinkedIn for sure, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. And you can, Black